Hey everyone, this is Dan Munn with Berkshire Hathaway, and I want to talk to you today about solar panels. It's a very interesting and controversial subject. We actually have two clients right now that are transacting on properties with solar panels. So very relevant. The question is, do they add value or do they not add value? And what to do if you're buying a house or selling a house that has solar panels on them. Okay, so the first question to ask is, are the panels leased or owned? This is a huge question. This completely changes how this scenario unfolds. It's the very first question you should ask. Are they leased or owned? So what happens if they're leased? More commonly, actually, they're leased. So what happens then if you're buying a house with leased solar panels? They don't add value. This trips up a lot of sellers. They think, oh, well, I have a house, I put solar panels on, and they're leased, so I should get more money for it. And it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. This would be like saying, let's say you wanted to sell a house and you had a car that you wanted to sell with the house, and the car was leased and you wanted to just try and transfer that lease to the next buyer. Well, how much would a buyer be willing to pay extra if they had to take over your car lease? Probably not much. Actually, they probably wouldn't want to pay. They'd probably want to pay less if they had to do that, right? Unless they really, really like your car. But even then, they'd rather just get their own car. So if it's leased, it doesn't really add any value. And also, solar leases are not good for owners. Just like a lot of things that are leased, you pay it off and you still don't own it. There's a lot of hidden fees, maintenance fees. They're very long term. So solar leases are just not very favorable for homeowners. They're great for the solar company. So in general, it's much preferred if the panels are owned rather than leased. So if they're owned, then the question is, are they paid off? Or is there still a balance on them? If the panels are paid off, this is the best case scenario, both for the buyer and the seller. Then it definitely adds value. Appraisers typically adjust 50 cents on the dollar for the total system cost. So let's say it costs 20 grand to put them in. An appraiser will add $10,000 of value to your house for the panels. And for a buyer, it's great. You get an asset that, if you stay in the house a long time, pays for itself and saves you money, and it's good for the environment. So then the last question is, what if they're not paid off? Most times they're not. What happens in that case? And again, they just don't really add any value if they're not paid off, unless the seller is going to pay them off at the closing. They don't add any value, because if you were selling a house, again, with a car that had a loan on it, and you wanted the buyer to take over the loan for your car when they bought your house, well, how much more would they pay for the house? Probably not much, unless you had a car that no one else could get. But again, in this case, the buyer, if they want to put panels on, they usually want to do it themselves anyway. So that's the overall message here. The only real scenario where solar panels add substantial value is if they're owned and paid off. And the last thing I would say is, if you're a homeowner and you're deciding whether or not you want solar panels, this is purely from a real estate perspective. I'm not talking about the environment or politics, those things aside, just purely from a real estate standpoint. It is not typically wise, at least this point in time, to put solar panels on your house. The only net effect, unless again they're completely paid off, but even then you're not getting all your money back, right? The only real net effect is that the house would just attract less buyers, because some buyers are scared by it, some are not comfortable with it, some just never want it. So overall, just from a real estate standpoint, it's not the best idea to put them on. Again, if you are an advocate for the environment, that's a completely different story. But hopefully that information is helpful for you. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.